Right now, let's bring in Democratic strategist Basil Smikle, former Undersecretary of State Rick Stengel, and Republican strategist Susan Del Percio. All three are MS Now political analysts. I'm glad you guys are here with me on this really very sad day for the Senate and for so many Americans, South Carolinians in particular. But I'm curious your reaction, Susan, to the senator's sudden passing and the legacy from his time in Washington. How do you see it?
I think it's very strong for a certain set of Republicans, those especially being sharing his hawkish views, which I did for many years, and that a voice that really a defender of Israel and Ukraine that is going to be missed at this critical time. I think, that's the short-term effect of his passing. I think when it comes to American politics, it cannot be overstated enough what he has done for Ukraine in his conversations with Donald Trump. But I also think is a bygone era that he represented of being friendly with the people across the aisle, being known as someone who is fun to be around and share a joke with. And that's unfortunate because we see more and more silos of our politicians.
Yeah, I almost call that old school. I mean, he had certainly deserved that moniker. He'd served in Congress for so many years, Rick. He was very involved, of course, in foreign policy, and he had been recently pushing the president to be more actively involved in trying to resolve the war in Ukraine. So give me your sense, big picture, and also focusing on Ukraine, of how his record on foreign affairs will be remembered.
Yes, Alex, I knew him a bit in the days when he palled around with John McCain, when he was sort of a McCain protege, and the so-called three amigos with McCain and Graham and Senator Joe Lieberman. And yes, I condolences to him and his family. And I do mourn for those days when you could have conservatives in each party uniting on similarities. You could have liberals in each party uniting on similarities. Graham was one of those people who was a bit of a maverick, like John McCain, until he was co-opted by Donald Trump. I mean, he ran against Donald Trump, remember, in 2016. And he is one of those people that liberals and progressives feel like, well, he knew what was happening and he knew better and he didn't really stand up to Trump. He was, as Susan mentioned, and as you mentioned, he was a staunch ally of Ukraine because he was staunchly anti-Putin and anti-Russia, which was, of course, the universal position of the Republican Party at one time, and he kept that on. And I think he was a real ally of Ukraine. But we've also seen this phenomenon that you see in Washington is when somebody dies, everybody tries to make that person's death something useful for their own motives. Donald Trump saying that he was talking about the Voter Suppression Act with him, which may or may not be true. Mr. Netanyahu talking about, how devoted he was for Israel. So we're seeing a little bit of that phenomenon in Washington where you steer someone's death to your point of view.
Interesting. I do love how Senator Adam Schiff, though, said that he was the Trump whisperer, Basil. And look, he did cross the aisle. He voted with Democrats occasionally, and most notably on an immigration reform bill that ultimately failed back in 2013. But will Democrats miss that aspect of Senator Graham's bipartisanship efforts? I mean, is there anyone to pick up that mantle?
Yeah, I don't know that there's anyone that I could name today that could pick up that mantle. To Rick and Susan's points, it is interesting because Lindsey Graham represents really two eras of the Senate. A pre-Trump era where there was a lot of focus on the sanctity of the institution. You heard a lot of that language when he was a House manager during the Clinton impeachment. But as you move forward in the Trump era, the power, instead of derived from the institution itself, senators derive their power directly from Donald Trump. So it becomes much more difficult to claim that kind of autonomy that will allow you to work across the aisle. We saw with John Cornyn, his attempts to do that, and look how that turned out. But yeah, and to Rick's point about the three amigos and also the Gang of Eight on an issue like immigration, he talked about being tough with immigration laws and an enforcement of those laws. but also finding a path to citizenship. That's language we do not hear at all anymore. So the fear is that, and the concern is that, even though he may have become the sort of Trump whisperer who engaged in this kind of proximity politics, where he would vocally and very vehemently defend the president, but try to work behind the scenes to interpret the president's language and behavior to his colleagues and even to a foreign policy audience, the sort of public performance of that, the public performance of trying to get this independence to be able to forge a clear path with this, using the strength and relying on the strength of the office and the institution, those days seem to be in our rear view.
How does, Susan, this change the landscape of the Senate? Is the Republican agenda a bit more at risk of maybe stalling now? And what does it mean that one of Donald Trump's staunchest Senate allies is gone?
A few things, Alex. One is, I think Donald Trump loses his ally who was most likely to be able to talk to other folks within the conference, whether it be Republicans or Democrats, to see if there was any path towards a resolution or a compromise. So that tool is no longer available to Donald Trump. It also makes the vote count even closer, at least temporarily. So do I think that Donald Trump's agenda is in jeopardy? Yes, but to be fair, I thought it was before the passing of Senator Graham. We'll see this most likely in the biggest test in Todd Blanche's nomination, depending on how fast that goes through for a vote. Will Lindsey Graham be replaced by then by the governor of South Carolina?
Appointed,
That's something I would be keeping an eye out on.
Yeah, very much so. Basil, Senator Graham was certainly a key voice in the Judiciary Committee to